Hello, friends. Have any of you ever been to a museum? A museum is the setting of this chapter, chapter 4, in Flat Stanley. Let's take a look. Oh, I'm having a little trouble finding it. I should have marked my page. Here we go. Oh, before we read, though, let's take a look at the questions. Okay, question number 1 for chapter 4. Why was Mr. Dart so gloomy? Now, I have not been introduced to Mr. Dart. I don't recall. I think he's a new character in this chapter. Number 2, describe the sneak thieves using text evidence from the newspaper. There must be an article about these bad guys. Sneak thieves. Number 3, why is it hopeless for the famous museum? Use text evidence to find the 3 reasons. 3 reasons why it is hopeless for this museum. Number 4, what did Mr. Dart want Stanley to wear? Number 5, how did Stanley feel about this disguise? Number 6, why had the sneak thieves never been caught? And I fear that number 7, if I ask it, will give the end of this chapter away, and I don't want to do that. So we'll hold off on looking at the last question for chapter 4. Let's go ahead and read. Chapter 4, The Museum Thieves. Mr. and Mrs. O.J. Dart lived in the apartment above the lamb chops. Mr. Dart was an important man, the director of the famous Museum of Art downtown in the city. Stanley Lambchop had noticed in the elevator that Mr. Dart, who was ordinarily a cheerful man, had become quite gloomy. But he had no idea. Let's see. Oh, there's Mr. Dart. He looks a bit like Salvador Dali. Salvador Dali is a very famous Spanish painter. He looks like an artist himself. He had no idea what the reason was. And then at breakfast one morning, he heard Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop talking about Mr. Dart. I see, said Mr. Lambchop, reading the paper over his coffee cup, that still another painting has been stolen from the famous museum. It says here that Mr. O.J. Dart, the director, is at his wit's end. Oh dear, are the police no help? Mrs. Lambchop asked. It seems not, said Mr. Lambchop. Listen to what the chief of police told the newspaper. We suspect a gang of sneak thieves. These are the worst kind. They work by sneakery, which makes them very difficult to catch. There's the newspaper, and it says, another painting stolen. However, my men and I will keep trying. Meanwhile, I hope people will buy tickets for the policemen's ball and not park their cars where street signs say they shouldn't. The next morning, Stanley Lambchop heard Mr. Dart talking to his wife in the elevator. These sneak thieves work at night, Mr. Dart said. It's very hard for our guards to stay awake when they've been on duty all day. And the famous museum is so big we cannot guard every picture at the same time. I fear it is hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. Suddenly, as if an electric light bulb had lit up in the air above his head, giving out little shooting lines of excitement, Stanley Lambchop had an idea, and he told it to Mr. Dart. There he is. Looks like he's got a great idea. Let's see what he tells Mr. Dart. Oh, we don't find out on the next page. Stanley, Mr. Dart said, if your mother will give her permission, I will put you and your plan into work this very night. Mrs. Lambchop gave her permission. But you will have to take a long nap this afternoon, she said. I won't have you up until all hours unless you do. The author gave us a clue about the plan, right? Stanley is going to have to do something at night. Let's find out what it is. That afternoon, after a long nap, Stanley went with Mr. Dart to the famous museum. Mr. Dart took him into the main hall where the biggest and most important paintings were hung. He pointed to a huge painting that showed a bearded man wearing a floppy velvet hat, playing a violin for a lady who lay on a couch. This is a very odd painting. It's got everything going on. There was a half-man, half-horse person standing behind them, and 3 fat children with wings were flying above. That, Mr. Dart explained, is the most expensive painting in the world. There was an empty picture frame on the opposite wall. We shall hear more about that later on. Oh, I think that the author is using foreshadowing there. Jeff Brown, has an empty picture frame on the opposite wall. Let's find out what that's about. Mr. Dart took Stanley into his office and said, "It's time for you to put on your disguise." "I already thought of that," Stanley Lambchop said, "and I brought one, my cowboy suit. It has a red bandana that I can tie over my face. No one will ever recognize me in a million years." "No," Mr. Dart said, "you'll have to wear the disguise I've chosen." From his closet, he took a white dress with a blue sash, a pair of shiny, little pointed shoes, a wide straw hat with a blue band that matched the sash, and a wig and a stick. The wig was made of blonde hair, long and done in ringlets. The stick was curved at the top of it, and it, too, had a blue ribbon on it. "In this shepherdess disguise," Mr. Dart said, "you'll look like a painting that belongs in the main hall. We do not have cowboy pictures in the main hall." Stanley was so disgusted he could hardly speak. "I'll look like a girl. That's what I'll look like," he said. "I wish I'd never had my idea." But he was a good sport, so he put on the disguise. Back in the main hall, Mr. Dart helped Stanley climb up into the empty picture frame. Stanley was able to stay in place because Mr. Dart had cleverly put 4 small spikes into the wall, one for each hand and one for each foot. The frame was a perfect fit. Against the wall, Stanley looked just like the picture. "Except for one thing," Mr. Dart said, "shepherdesses." A shepherd is a boy who watches sheep, and a shepherdess, of course, is a girl, "are supposed to look happy. They smile at their sheep and at the sky. You look fierce and not happy, Stanley." I don't think anyone would be happy in that costume. That looks very uncomfortable. Stanley tried hard to get the faraway look in his eyes and even to smile a bit. Mr. Dart stood back a few feet and stared at him for a moment. "Well," he said, "it may not be art, but I know what I like." He went off to make sure that certain other parts of Stanley's plan were taken care of, and Stanley was left alone. It was very dark in the main hall. A little bit of moonlight came through the windows, and Stanley could just make out the world's most expensive painting on the opposite wall. He felt as though the bearded man with the violin and the lady on the couch and the half-horse person and the winged children were all waiting, as he was, for something to happen. Time passed, and he got tireder and tireder. Anyone would be this tired late at night, especially if you had to stand in a picture frame balancing on little spikes. Maybe they won't come, Stanley thought. Maybe the sneak thieves won't come at all. The moon went behind a cloud, and then the main hall was pitch dark. It seemed to get quieter, too, with the darkness. There was absolutely no sound at all. Stanley felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle beneath the golden curls of his wig. Creak! The creaking sound came from right out in the middle of the main hall, and even as he heard it, Stanley saw in the same place a tiny yellow glow of light. What do you think that is? Do you have a prediction? The creaking came again, and the glow got bigger. A trap door had opened in the floor, and 2 men came out of it and into the hall. There they are. Stanley understood everything at once. These must be the sneak thieves. They had a secret trapdoor entrance into the museum from the outside, and that's why they'd never been caught. And tonight they were back to steal the most expensive painting in the world. He held very still in his picture frame and listened to the sneak thieves. "This is it, Max," said the first one. "This is where we art robbers pull a sensational job, whilst the civilized community sleeps." "Right, Luther," said the other man. "In all this great city there is no one to suspect us." "Ha ha," thought Stanley Lambchop. "That's what you think." The sneak thieves put down their lantern, and they took the world's most expensive painting off the wall. What would we do to anyone who tried to capture us, Max?" the first man asked. "We would kill him. What else?" his friend replied. That was enough to frighten Stanley. And he was even more frightened when... There are those sneak thieves. They do look very sneaky. Luther came over and stared at him. "This sheep girl," Luther said. "I thought sheep girls were supposed to smile, Max. This one looks scared." Just in time, Stanley managed to get a faraway look in his eyes again and to smile. Sort of. "You're crazy, Luther," Max said. "She's smiling, and what a pretty little thing she is, too." That made Stanley furious. He waited until the sneak thieves had turned back to the world's most expensive painting, and then he shouted in his loudest, most terrifying voice, "Police! Police! Mr. Dart, the sneak thieves are here! The sneak thieves looked at one another. Max, said the first one very quietly, I think I heard the sheep girl yell. I think I did too, said Max in a quivery voice. Oh boy. Yelling pictures? We both need a rest. You'll get a rest, all right, shouted Mr. Dart, rushing in with the chief of police and lots of guards and policemen behind him. You'll get arrested, that's what. Ha ha! The sneak thieves were too mixed up by Mr. Dart's joke and too frightened by the policemen to put up a fight. Before they knew it, they had been handcuffed and led away to jail. The next morning in the office, the chief of police, the next morning in the office of the chief of police, Stanley Lambchop got a medal. The day after that, his picture was in all the papers. Let's take a look at a stack of newspapers. The Daily Sentinel. Hero. Flat boy helps capture art thieves. Good job, Flat Stanley. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.